This hearing will come to order. Good morning. In 1890, the superintendent of the census declared the end to the American frontier by stating, quote, "Up to and including 1880, the country had a frontier of settlement, but at present the unsettled area has been so broken into isolated bodies of settlement that there can hardly be said to be a frontier line. In the discussion of its extent, its westward movement, etc., it cannot, therefore, any longer have a place in the census reports." The American vision of westward expansion that had been initiated 86 years earlier through the Lewis and Clark expedition had been successful in leading to the expansion of American commerce and settlement in a new territory that had not previously been charted by American pioneers. Today, this committee embarks on a series of hearings looking at reopening the American frontier with our sights set on the heavens, which President Kennedy referred to as the new frontier. It is only fitting that the nation born on the last frontier should continue to lead the way in the new frontier. America must expand commerce and ultimately settlement into space, and we must do it first. This is an issue that not only impacts our global competitiveness, but also our national security. The world is much safer with America as the global leader on this planet. And the world will similarly be safer and stronger if the United States and our ideals of free enterprise and free speech are the driving force of commerce and settlement throughout the galaxy. For nearly 60 years, NASA has granted the United States access to space and has made human spaceflight a reality. In recent years, commercial space companies have made enormous strides in technological advancement and the scope of their business activities that are leading to a new and dynamic renaissance in spaceflight. This is creating the real possibility that in the not-too-distant future, American private citizens will be able to reach space, hopefully from a launch pad or runway in the great state of Texas. However, to ensure that this remains within the realm of the possible, Congress needs to continue to work to ensure that investment and innovation within the commercial space sector isn't chilled by obsolete regulations or overly burdensome requirements that may not naturally apply to new business models. As we look to the future of American free enterprise and settlement in space, we should also thoroughly review the United Nations Outer Space Treaty, which was written and enacted in a very different time and era in 1967. It's important that Congress evaluate how that treaty, enacted 50 years ago, will impact new and innovative activity within space as well as potential settlement throughout the galaxy. Finally, we would be remiss if this committee did not also explore ways that the Commercial Space Center, academia, and NASA can look to build upon current partnerships and create new ones that can advance human spaceflight, research, and discovery. As we embark together on this series of hearings and potential legislation, I look forward to continuing to work in the same strong bipartisan manner that this subcommittee has always worked, working with Chairman Thune, with Ranking Member Nelson, with our subcommittee's previous ranking member, Senator Peters, and also I want to welcome the new ranking member of this committee, Senator Markey. Welcome to this committee. I will say at a time of significant partisan division on a great many issues, this subcommittee has been remarkable, now under a Democratic Senate and a Republican Senate, for being able to produce bipartisan legislation. And we have produced not one but two bills in the last couple of years: the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, which was signed into law by President Obama, and the NASA authorization legislation, which was signed into law by President Trump. In both instances, this committee was able to work together across party lines to achieve consensus and to move the ball forward. And I look forward to our working together to continue to do so and to continue working on new legislation to nurture, to create, and to expand a vibrant commercial space sector and a strong NASA so that America continues to lead the world in space exploration. And with that, I'll recognize Ranking Member Nelson for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I want to defer to the ranking member of the subcommittee, and then I'll make some appropriate comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And I am thrilled here today as I launch into my new role as the ranking member on this very important subcommittee. Investment in science and space has helped drive the American economy since World War II. It's unleashed American innovators and entrepreneurs to develop new technologies that have changed the world. And it has helped us understand the changes in the world caused by human activities that alter the environment and the climate. This subcommittee has an important role to play in ensuring that science and space activities continue to help America thrive. Today's hearing title invokes the frontier. Next month, we'll celebrate the centennial of President John F. Kennedy's birth. Science and space were an integral part of the new frontier that he saw in 1960. His challenge to land a man on the moon opened up a new era, one in which human travel and live beyond the Earth. Now, there are a few arenas of modern life in which space does not play a role. From satellite navigation to telecommunications to monitoring storms, we rely upon space. But in the next few years, there will be even more activity in space than we have ever seen in our history. In less than a lifetime, we have gone from one man circling the globe to contemplating settlement on Mars. Now, as space exploration and activities evolve, it is vital that we use the lessons of our past to guide us as we navigate this expanding territory. Prior to major settlement of the American West in the 19th century, Congress funded a number of scientific expeditions to explore and understand the Western territories. This government investment helped identify productive agricultural land and initiated a transportation revolution with the transcontinental railroads that allowed individuals and companies to succeed in the space age. Government investment in science has gotten us to the moon, and has put a rover on Mars, a satellite orbiting Saturn, and has gazed into the depths of the universe. The Cassini spacecraft just began its grand finale this week and is in the first of its orbits around Saturn right now. The James Webb Space Telescope is set to be launched next year. Government investment in science has led the way for the private investment that is now flowing into space activities. Congress has a critical role to play to ensure that public and private investment is driving innovation and responsible development in space. And even as private companies expand their space activities, there is still an important role for public investment. Today, the International Space Station serves as a national laboratory, which has dedicated space for science experiments from universities, federal scientists, and small private research firms that could not otherwise be attempted. These experiments are varied and diverse and have the potential to solve some of the biggest problems humanity struggles with today, including improving the quality and quantity of our global food supply, finding new cures for cancer, understanding antibiotic resistance, and so much more. We all stand to gain from supporting basic science research in space. We must also remember that space exploration and development is a global endeavor. It requires international cooperation and global standards, even as the space industry becomes more competitive. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on our growing American commercial space enterprise so that all of our country can begin to understand this incredible future that is about to unfold. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Markey. I would note that as we launch or relaunch a focus on the new frontier, it is altogether fitting that our new ranking member would evoke memories of President John F. Kennedy with that unique Boston brogue returning to this subcommittee.
I will say this about my accent. It is not a Kennedy accent. That is a distinct and separate way of using the English language. One family had that one privilege to do so.
Well, and thankfully, my home state of Texas, none of us have accents in any way, shape, or form. And with that, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, it's fitting that the new ranking member of the subcommittee is from Massachusetts because it was the vision and the leadership of President Kennedy that picked a goal, and that goal was rather striking. And it was that we were going to the moon and return within a period of 9 years. And of course, the nation marshaled the resources, and as a result of that can-do spirit of NASA, as a result of all of the spin-offs that came out of that technological revolution, particularly the micro-miniaturization, it has dramatically improved the quality of our lives here on Earth. I am looking forward to that happening again now that we passed the NASA authorization bill just a while ago, and it sets as its goal the goal of going to Mars in the decade of the 2030s. And it builds on the NASA authorization bill that you talk about bipartisanship. That's exactly what happened with your predecessor, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, and this senator in putting together that set NASA off on the course that you see on the manned program, a dual course of the commercial as well as NASA then getting out of low Earth orbit and going to explore the heavens. And I might say as a personal comment, Mr. Chairman, to your fitting remarks starting off about the frontier, and that frontier was always westward. That frontier is now upward, and it's inward. And as a part of that frontier, even though the official that you quoted in 1890 said the frontier had been achieved, that Homestead Act was still used for several years thereafter. And so it was with my grandparents. In 1913, if you worked the land for 4 continuous years and could prove that the government would deed you 160 acres of land. And that 160 acres of land, I have a copy of the deed signed by Woodrow Wilson in 1917. That 160 acres of land today is at the north end of the Space Shuttle runway at the Kennedy Space Center. And so, needless to say, it was not lost on me that first morning that we went to the launch pad, and as it turned out, we did several trips, 5 after 4 scrubs. But that first morning, I just couldn't believe it. I was the last crew member to crawl in and strap in, and as they were getting in, I wandered off on that launch tower by myself, looked in the direction of 3 miles away where the old homestead was, and just was overwhelmed realizing that my grandparents, who I did not know, would have never believed that a grandson was going to literally leave the face of the earth almost from the old homestead. So thank you for evoking the memories of the new frontier and that continuing frontier. I'll just make a couple of other comments. As I have shared as I've visited with our witnesses, this senator is so excited to see the abandoned launch pads at Cape Canaveral, which were alive with activity a half a century ago. They are coming back to life. And as a result of a lot of the activities represented in the panel that you have. And that finally took getting agencies of the government who had been in stovepipes finally coming together. There had to be a little prayer session that we had to drag them to the altar to have a prayer session. But between the Air Force and NASA and the FAA, they got their acts together, and the proof's in the pudding. We see what is happening. And now, in this recently completed NASA authorization bill, it sets the standards. It brings that cooperation of all those agencies together in the commercial space sector, living alongside the necessary government launches, plus the NASA launches that will be from Pad 39B. And so it's going to be an exciting, exciting future. The transformation of the Cape is illustrative of the broader impacts that the space industry has to offer this country. And we're just getting going. Both of you happen to mention the telescopes. I have behind my desk in our office here, I have a compendium of 5 years of the photographs taken by the Hubble Space Telescope, which is millions and millions of light years away, showing the birth and death of stars. With the Hubble that we're going to launch next year, we're going to look back further in time, almost to the beginning. That's going to bring new discoveries in addition to the excitement that we've already seen of other suns that actually have planets revolving around them. And so the challenges are there. We're ready to meet those challenges. The key to success is continuing a balanced space program. One that does not neglect science nor aeronautics, and along with the private space endeavors, between cooperation and competition, balance between them as well as between risk and public safety. And for that, I think we're going to have a very exciting future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nelson, and I thank you also for sharing the story of your grandparents and homesteading. And just as your grandparents could not imagine their grandson being launched into space, perhaps sometime in the future your grandkids will be homesteading 160 acres on the moon or on Mars.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I still have 2 children that are not married, and
I can't help you there.
My wife and I are worried that we're going to be on oxygen before we have grandchildren.
Well, that gives us time to get back to the moon and get to Mars. With that, I want to welcome this distinguished panel of witnesses today. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us this morning. Our first witness is Mr. Robert Bigelow, who is the founder and president of Bigelow Aerospace, which manufactures and develops expandable space station modules. Bigelow Aerospace has designed Beam, the first ever expandable space station module to occupy humans while in space. Prior to founding Bigelow Aerospace, Mr. Bigelow founded the hotel chain Budget Suites of America. Our second witness, Mr. Rob Meyerson, is president of Blue Origin, where he has overseen the steady growth of the company since 2003. Prior to Blue Origin, Mr. Meyerson worked at Kistler Aerospace and as an aerospace engineer at NASA's Johnson Space Center. Mr. Meyerson earned a B.S. in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Michigan and a master's degree in Engineering Management from the University of Houston. Always good to see someone who has been a Houstonian. Mr. George Whitesides is the CEO of Galactic Ventures, which is developing a fleet of commercial space vehicles as well as a small satellite launch capability. Prior to joining Galactic Ventures, Mr. Whitesides served as Chief of Staff at NASA, where he provided policy and staff support to the agency's administrator and received the Distinguished Service Medal, the highest award the agency confers. Mr. Whitesides is an honored graduate of my alma mater, Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School, and holds a master's degree from the University of Cambridge in England. Mr. Andrew Rush is president and CEO of Silicon Valley-based Made in Space, which specializes in the engineering and manufacturing of three-dimensional printers for use in microgravity. Made in Space's 3D printer, zero-G printer, was the first manufacturing device in space. Prior to joining Made in Space, Mr. Rush was a partner at the PCT Law Group. Thank you, each of you, for joining us. Mr. Bigelow, you're the first witness.
All right. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today and present my views on the subject of this hearing, reopening the American frontier for free enterprise in space. First, let me thank the committee for the work it has done to support the commercial space industry. For over 17 years, I have personally funded the development of space habitat stations at Bigelow Aerospace, and I have spent over about $350 million in that endeavor. Commercializing space habitat systems will dramatically lower costs to NASA and other customers. To date, we have successfully launched 3 habitat station prototypes. These new technologies comprise the basis for the structure of our spacecraft and in full scale provide superior radiation, debris, and micrometeorite protection as compared to the modules of the ISS. In 2006 and 2007, we launched the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 prototype spacecraft from the Yashny missile base in Siberia, Russia. The Genesis program was the first test of these new technologies in the space environment. Both spacecraft exceeded our expectations. In April of 2016, the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module, or BEAM for short, was launched to the International Space Station under a partnership agreement with NASA and has undergone continuous testing attached to the Tranquility Module of the ISS. Today, we are focused on our primary goal, which is to provide customers with an affordable and safe station that can be augmented and outfitted for almost any type of mission, to almost any practical destination. Bigelow's primary spacecraft, the B-330, offers 330 cubic meters of pressurized volume that traditional metallic structures, including the ISS, cannot match in terms of total up mass per launch, and at significantly less cost. A single fully deployed 330 expandable habitat provides approximately 1/3 of the current pressurized volume of the International Space Station. Bigelow Aerospace business model is built on time sharing, volume, and other assets. We should view future low Earth orbit locations and businesses as the wellspring for deep space capabilities. Commercially available habitat stations like the B-330 provide affordability and potential access to space that otherwise has been out of the reach for most all nations and companies of the world. NASA took the first step to address its destination deficit recently when it instituted the Next Steps program. Part of the Next Steps program is to develop the necessary technology for NASA to transition to deep space activities. This is achieved through cost savings by partnering with commercial entities to assist NASA's efforts to get out of low Earth orbit, return to the moon, and open up other new American frontiers across the solar system. We at Bigelow have worked hard to keep production on schedule so that we can produce 2 flight-ready B-330s by the end of 2020. While I hope that Congress and the President Trump will work together to provide NASA the necessary financial resources it needs to succeed, I am moving ahead with the B-330 program. Now, let me briefly describe some of the risks and threats I see. First, I believe that the United States is quickly approaching a crossroad. There are no destinations for American transportation systems besides the ISS. Where shall NASA and this nation go once the ISS is no longer available? NASA will always need training and testing facilities in low Earth orbit and beyond. Commercially affordable facilities where the customer is king is the practical answer. To that end, NASA needs to be a strong and diverse customer of the commercial space industry. Bigelow Aerospace continues to develop partnerships with launch providers and other companies to ensure that NASA and other potential customers have alternative choices for the utilization of affordable habitat stations. But in order to achieve a truly free enterprise in space, NASA is too vital a customer to ignore. NASA needs to be the necessary funding and policy direction to transition from the ISS to supporting space missions based on utilization of commercially supplied space habitats and other transportation assets. China has created, in their quest to develop their own national space program, a program that is not disconnected from its military. The Chinese government has made it known that it wants to offer free access to other countries to utilize their national space station in the near future. To that end, the Chinese and ISS partner states have discussed international space cooperation and partnerships. While our allies consider partnering with China, we should be mindful of strategic consequences that an engaged China could have on the future of American enterprise in space. I have had innumerable discussions about the future of space exploration with many people. One thing I think is clear is that NASA is too focused on just transportation systems to the ISS. Everyone wants to know what are NASA's plans to transition out of the ISS. Whether the ISS continues or not, additional destinations besides the ISS are vital to sustain a viable space crew and cargo enterprise with new markets that eventually replace the ISS. Moreover, I believe that if initiated soon, Bigelow Aerospace and other companies could provide a lunar depot using a B-330 habitat station that would enable NASA and commercial entities access to the moon and cislunar space in a 4-year program. If we truly commit to an initial destination in low Earth orbit, then following quickly to cislunar space, I believe that expandable habitats can offer NASA and others the ability to test and gain experience for future missions to the moon and Mars. That concludes my written remarks. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bigelow. Mr. Meyerson.
Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Markey, Ranking Member Nelson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about reopening the American frontier and Blue Origin's place in this future. Blue Origin was founded to bring about a future where millions of people are living and working in space, which would certainly equate to a large expansion of the American frontier. We believe that the backbone of this vision is to achieve full operational reusability, to lower the cost of access to space and increase safety and reliability. We've recently made great progress flying our fully reusable New Shepard vehicle to space and back 5 times in less than 12 months, and are now building New Glenn, which will launch people and payloads to low Earth orbit and beyond. The passage of the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act in 2015 helped lay the groundwork for much of what we plan to do in the coming years. And for that, I would like to thank you for your leadership. As you prepare to take the next step, we would like to offer a few suggestions. The FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation, or AST, does a good job of balancing its requirement to protect the uninvolved public with its statutory mandate to promote the commercial spaceflight industry. AST's budget has remained flat for several years, while the number of launches has continuously increased. We join the rest of the commercial spaceflight industry in urging Congress to increase funding for AST to allow the office to operate as a responsive and effective agency. That said, we encourage Congress to ensure that AST is prioritizing its resources on its current statutory mission. We believe AST's resources are insufficient to meet its existing obligations and do not believe AST should take on new authorities now, such as on-orbit authority, space situational awareness, or space traffic management. We want to work with AST on the impending licensing traffic jam before they start taking on orbital traffic jams. As Blue Origin initiates the application to license our New Glenn reusable launch vehicle, we are encountering conflicting expectations on the regulatory process between FAA and the Air Force. This conflict stems from the lack of a federal adaptation to the market, which is transitioning from expendable rockets to reusable rockets. In contrast to those for expendable rockets, the Air Force and AST licensing requirements for reusable rockets are completely different from each other. While pursuing an FAA launch license for our New Glenn launch at a federal range, we simultaneously have an entirely different but equally rigorous set of deliverables for the Air Force, all for the exact same vehicle. This is duplicative and onerous and will increase costs, delays, and uncertainty. In his previous role as commander of Air Force Space Command, General Hyten wrote a commander's intent memorandum in March of 2016, which highlights the necessity for the Air Force to work with the FAA to eliminate duplicative requirements and approvals. The leadership of the 45th Space Wing understands the need to transition to a commercial model and has begun working with Blue Origin and the rest of the industry to adapt processes to facilitate these partnerships. That said, the leadership's vision has not yet been fully adopted at all levels of the Air Force. As a result, the Air Force has not yet realized its full potential to move at the velocity required to support commercial operators. We are hopeful that with continued leadership from the Air Force, FAA, and this subcommittee, this issue will be fully addressed in the near term. Ultimately, we want AST to be the single point of contact within the government for all commercial launches. We would like AST to have sole authority over launches and reentries without regard to location or type of launch. At federal ranges, commercial launches now require duplicative government approvals, delaying launch activity and burdening launch providers. This area is primed for increased efficiency in government operators. Finally, I'd like to express our strong support for NASA's use of other transaction authority agreements and other innovative contracting mechanisms, such as those used in commercial crew, cargo, and the Next Step program. Public-private partnerships allow government and industry to work toward common goals in a more efficient, agile, and cost-effective manner, and expand the resources available for space exploration. In March of this year, we announced the Blue Moon lunar lander to land large amounts of payload on the lunar surface. Blue Origin is willing to significantly invest in this development as part of a public-private partnership with NASA in the interest of achieving a return to the moon, which we believe to be a worthy national goal. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to working with you on updated Commercial Space Launch Act this Congress, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Whitesides.
Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Markey, Ranking Member Nelson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about how our companies can help reopen the American frontier in space. Space represents the best of America: discovery, inspiration, cooperation, but also courage, competitiveness, and resolute determination. The women and men in our company, as in others, I consider among the American explorers of the 21st century. I'm the CEO of Virgin's Galactic Ventures, and I'm here to represent our human spaceflight program, as well as our small satellite launch capability. We have 3 commercial space companies within the Virgin space portfolio: Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit, and the Spaceship Company. Together, our team employs over 800 direct staff and many more contractors and suppliers across virtually every state in the nation. And we look forward to commercial operations in Senator Udall's state soon. Virgin Galactic will operate Spaceship Two, a suborbital spaceflight system that is manufactured and tested by the Spaceship Company. Spaceship Two is a rocket plane that is deployed from a carrier aircraft called White Knight 2 and is designed to safely transport people and payloads to space on a frequent basis. Ultimately, we aspire to evolve this technology to provide high-speed point-to-point transportation services between continents. Galactic's sister company, Virgin Orbit, is developing and manufacturing a dedicated orbital rocket for small satellites called Launcher 1. Launcher 1 is a two-stage liquid propulsion rocket deployed from a Boeing 747 that we ultimately plan to operate weekly. Today, hundreds of companies around the world, as well as many important parts of the U.S. government, are developing small satellites for everything from communications to remote sensing applications. Launcher 1 will offer a flexible and affordable launch service for such satellites beginning in 2018. Both Spaceship 2 and Launcher 1 will operate under an FAA operator's license issued by the Office of Commercial Space Transportation, or AST. The U.S. has always been a global leader in space, in part because Congress has created a regulatory and policy environment that supports commercial space companies by prioritizing safety without stifling private sector innovation. The regulatory learning period is a great example of this. However, to continue our nation's supportive policies as launch providers go from test to operations, it is important to adapt and address new issues facing the industry. For example, AST must have sufficient resources to successfully undertake its current responsibilities in an era of increased space launch activity and the ability to adjust its policies and practices to respond to industry developments. As the government seeks to develop new and innovative space capabilities, whether for civil or defense purposes, it should encourage partnerships with the commercial space sector through firm fixed-price contracts and efficient acquisition strategies. Above all, the government should refrain from using taxpayer dollars to fund programs that directly compete with commercially available or emerging services, and strive to leverage its taxpayer dollars by using commercial services wherever possible. NASA is already doing this in efforts such as the Flight Opportunities Program that purchases capacity on reusable suborbital vehicles for research payloads, and in its Venture Class Launch Services program that uses small launchers to place CubeSats in orbit. The government should support policies that allow for domestic industry growth and increased capture of global market share. For example, the government should vigorously continue its export control reform efforts. Domestically, Congress should work to ensure that disparate state laws and regulations do not create unanticipated barriers to innovation and growth. Finally, the government should continue its long-standing policy forbidding the commercial use of excess ICBM assets, or else risk a catastrophic impact on the U.S. launch industrial base that would undermine national security and civil space objectives. Since multiple new privately developed vehicles will be entering the marketplace over the next 2 years, there is no reason to change this long-standing policy. Our companies are dedicated to providing frequent, reliable, and safe transportation to space for humans and payloads. Our vehicles, along with other commercial space companies, will continue to push Earth's economic sphere outward. This subcommittee is helping to ensure that the U.S. continues to play a leading role in exploring and democratizing the next great frontier. We look forward to working with you on these and future issues.
Thank you. Mr. Rush.
Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Markey, Ranking Member Nelson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. As CEO of Made in Space, I have the immense privilege of leading an incredibly passionate and talented team in pursuit of making the cislunar economy a reality. We want to see people sustainably, commercially living and working in space. We're developing space-capable manufacturing technologies because we believe that manufacturing in space is a key enabler of the cislunar economy. As a young company with no outside investment, our founding team started with small, practical steps, a philosophy we still apply today. By working with a variety of groups and leveraging infrastructure I'll be talking about in a moment, we've made real progress. After initially demonstrating 3D printing and microgravity via NASA's Flight Opportunities Program, Made in Space was granted a series of SBIR contracts, allowing us to work with Marshall Space Flight Center to build and launch a 3D printer to the International Space Station. In 2014, that device produced the very first objects to ever be manufactured off the face of the planet. This capability is paradigm shifting because it allows us to produce spares, parts, and fixes on demand, on the spot. Without infrastructure like the Flight Opportunities Program, the SBIR program, and the International Space Station, We could not have developed this capability at the price that we developed it at, nor in a step-by-step fashion. We're now building on this foundation in other ways. In March of 2016, under a user agreement with the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space, or CASIS, our second-generation 3D printer that we own and operate was launched to the International Space Station. This device, called AMF, has been operating profitably on the International Space Station for a year, producing parts for a wide variety of government and commercial customers. In fact, our very first customer was the home improvement giant Lowe's. Operating on the International Space Station is a crucial stepping stone to sustainable commercial activity in space because it allows for the refinement of technology and incubates cislunar economic business models. In late 2016, via a public-private partnership, a Made in Space-led team began work for NASA's Space Technology Mission Directorate to develop large-scale in-space additive manufacturing and assembly technologies. We call this system Archinaut. Now, Archinaut enables the optimization of spacecraft structures for their operational environment, for the microgravity environment, rather than having to primarily design them to survive launch. This technology enables us to build large structures at lower cost in space, enables the robotic manufacturing and assembly of large reflectors, space stations, and other applications for civil, defense, and space customers. We applaud the use and expansion of public-private partnerships, which focus on delivering capabilities which are useful to both the government and the private sector. American free enterprise in space can also be expanded via manufacturing of space-enabled materials. These are materials which, due to being manufactured in space, have emergent beneficial properties for use here down on the Earth. These materials are produced in space and then brought back to Earth for sale and utilization. Now, on the International Space Station National Lab, Main Space will soon be manufacturing Z-band, a space-enabled optical fiber which market research indicates can be profitably sold when launching the raw materials from Earth. Z-band promises to deliver significantly better signal throughput than traditional fiber for telecommunications applications, a $2 billion a year market. We have self-funded the development of a pilot facility that we launched and operated on the ISS this year, and we intend to expand production further on the ISS and eventually move to commercial platforms in space, opening the door for the industrial production of thousands of kilometers of material a year. This would not be achievable without the infrastructure of the ISS National Lab and the research into Z-band's promise and properties performed by personnel at NASA Ames Research Center, NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, and other facilities. In closing, we at Main Space are grateful for the support that we have received. We encourage continued operation and expansion of the infrastructure that I've just described. It has allowed us and other companies to develop capabilities in a step-by-step fashion, creating solutions for both the public and the private sector. We strongly believe that in-space manufacturing will be an anchor tenet of the cislunar economy and encourage the subcommittee to take steps to ensure that it flourishes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rush, and thank you to each of the witnesses for your very helpful testimony. We'll now move to the question portion of the hearings, and let me start out with this. As Congress looks to build upon the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, what are the regulations that are most impacting your companies that need to be addressed by Congress, or processes that can be streamlined to facilitate or accelerate the exploration of space?
If I could start, as I stated in my oral and also in my written testimony, we think the designation of FAA as the sole lead agency for licensing commercial space launches from independent of the location of the range is the single most thing that as a launch operator we would like to see to streamline space regulation. Thank you.
Senator, two suggestions from Virgin's perspective. On indemnification, since 1988, U.S. law has included a third-party risk-sharing regime for FAA-licensed commercial space launches and re-entries that allows U.S. companies to compete more effectively with their foreign competitors. Without this means of limiting catastrophic risk, both the industry and the federal government would be subject to significant legal risk. The CSLCA extended indemnification to 2025. We encourage this subcommittee to study and consider a permanent indemnification regime for the U.S. launch industry. And if I could add one more, in terms of streamlining hybrid regulations, Virgin Galactic and Virgin Orbit's vehicles form a hybrid launch system involving both an aircraft and a space vehicle. Both AVS and AST within FAA have tremendous expertise in their respective fields, and in our case have been willing to work with us to meet our flight test schedule. In the future, as more vehicles and flights come online, streamlining the regulatory environment for hybrid vehicles would be a welcome improvement to the current process.
I'd like to suggest that staying with Space Act agreements is a significant step forward, as opposed to the FAR type of structure of contracting. We have used them with NASA, and they are expeditious, they're agile, they do not involve a lot of red tape. So to us, Space Act agreements should be maintained as a principal method of contracting between the commercial sector and the government sector.
As a company that operates in space, we would like to see a few things. An affirmation that intellectual property that's developed in space by companies operating in space, whether that be within a government facility or without, be retained wholly by the company that creates that intellectual property. Further, as a company that is seeking to manufacture goods on U.S. spacecraft and on U.S. modules, we'd like to see those modules and spacecraft continue to be treated as U.S. soil, so that one day when we're manufacturing a wide variety of high-value goods in space and bringing them back, there's no question that they are not subject to any sort of import or customs tax. Further, in the more near term, simplifying the process for getting payloads to the ISS and operating those payloads there is something I think that all operators would like to see.
Well, thank you. Those are all helpful suggestions, and I'll note, Mr. Rush, on your last point, I certainly hope we would not trigger reciprocal tariffs from Mars. That would be a real problem.
Nor a border adjustment tag.
Mr. Meyerson, Blue Origin and SpaceX are both making terrific strides in changing human spaceflight and lowering the price of access through the use of reusable rockets, a notion that not too long ago would have been almost unthinkable. What's the difference in the licensing requirements set by the Air Force and set by the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation, and when it comes to using a reusable rocket compared to an expendable rocket?
So the reusable licensing regime has not been utilized yet, so it's a relatively new regime within the FAA, and that's one that we're now exploring with our new Shepherd and our new Glenn vehicles. The current regime requires, when you fly a commercial vehicle off a federal range, it has both FAA and the Air Force involvement. And so you're providing the same types of documents, safety analyses, hazard analyses, reports, but in different formats to different agencies. And that is what I referred to earlier as duplicative, and we think it's unnecessary. So, okay.
One additional question, Mr. Bigelow. If Bigelow Aerospace sought to place a Bigelow habitat either on the surface of the moon or in orbit around the moon as a lunar depot, are there any significant regulatory barriers to doing so? And does the U.S. government have a workable framework in place to enable and support commercial space activities in space and on and around planetary bodies?
We don't believe so. We think that it's consistent within the framework of the '67 Space Treaty. We also think that as a partner, in the context of a commercial government partnership with NASA, we would be mutually aware that we had to follow prescriptions of behavior, to invoke safety where it would be necessary. We have considered this type of activity for some years, deploying structures on the surface of the moon. We have architectures that address that, and as the same with orbiting depots.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bigelow, what role do you see public-private partnerships filling in regards to maintaining a national laboratory in space?
I don't see it as a zero-sum game. I don't see it as a choice of either or. If I were in a position of decision for NASA, I would say I would want both. I would want to harmoniously blend the obtaining of commercial assets under affordable circumstances and reliable circumstances, and be accustomed to their operation, acclimate my own corps, astronaut corps, to those facilities, those platforms, concurrent with the operation of the ISS. And then at the time the ISS is eventually repositioned or reassigned other mission, maybe involving commercial uses or not, then I would already have platforms in place in low Earth orbit, where at the same time that those are being positioned, I would be able to increase the size of my astronaut corps. I would increase the size of the population of Johnson Space Center, because now there isn't just one platform to monitor and to operate. There could be 3 or 4 or 5. And the advantage with the commercial sector is that those platforms, the ones that would be added, would be at a small fraction of the cost of the original station.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Meyerson, Russia, India, China, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, there's going to be a lot of traffic up there as each year goes by. How would you suggest that we work together in order to ensure that there are common minimal safety standards that are established and adhered to globally?
Well, I think the FAA is currently doing a very good job of developing those standards, and what we need as space gets global, we need more launch capacity. And so with the long-term vision of millions of people living and working in space, it's going to be not just Americans, but it's going to be people throughout the world that are living and working in space, and we'll need launch capacity to do that. So what I'm suggesting and urging is a very streamlined process for doing that, so that different companies in different countries can demonstrate their capabilities and that approach. So.
And what would be, from your perspective, the correct mechanism to use in order to ensure that there is a minimal international safety standard?
You know, I'd be happy to provide an answer to that one on the record. I'm not really prepared to answer that question, but it's a complex question, so.
We would appreciate it. Anyone
thank you.
on the panel have any suggestions?
Well, I think initially the philosophy is less regulation is better, while maintaining the context of common sense and safety and organization. You know, so we have 2 or 3 years ago, we were working with George Neal and FAST to acquire a policy change within the FAST, and that was achieved where our company was used sort of more or less as the guinea pig, where launches would not be sanctioned from U.S. territory to be vectoring a payload to a location on the surface of the moon where Bigelow Aerospace had some kind of activity ongoing. And that was a policy change. The next step from that is in addition to that, would be probably to prescribe a standoff distance, because that was mute, as to if there were some kind of miscalculation in the delivery of that payload, what is the logical standoff distance of safety? Would it be 300 kilometers, 250 miles, whatever, as a radius, so that you have that geographic protection?
Thank you. And maybe I'll just throw this out for anyone who wants to take it. What is the role of the Air Force going forward? Do you see that ultimately being phased out and the private sector will just be in charge of its own responsibilities? Can any of you take that as a question?
We would like to see a Space Command have a presence in space. We would like to actually see that those kinds of assets are reached, are accessed earlier than later. We think that the NRL, the FRL, could use those kinds of locations for unique laboratory purposes.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, the urging is on FAA regulation of commercial launches. The Air Force, of course, has their own missions that are of a national security nature and would require a different type of oversight, and that is absolutely necessary and essential. So, and we'd see that continuing.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Nelson.
I was fascinated, Mr. Rush, in you telling about using a 3D printer, creating a new, more pure fiber optic cable that you would then, because of the properties of zero-G, it would be so pure that it becomes economical, then to manufacture it in space and take it back to Earth, because it can convey so much more information so rapidly. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
Well, so how can we improve the ISS as an incubator to help enterprises such as yours, and do you see that it needs to be extended beyond the existing life, which is 2024?
I believe that some really amazing strides have been taken to let folks like us operate on the ISS, period, and pursue these things. You know, really having the framework of, you know, the ISS National Lab gives us access to that in a way that, you know, I can build a pilot factory that's maybe, you know, 50 kilograms and get that up and operate it, where if absent that facility, I would be, you know, buying a ride from some of these fine gentlemen's companies at you know, orders of magnitude greater cost, which for a commercial entity might not be possible. As we move forward, I would recommend that, you know, that the ISS National Lab and the folks that support that that entity more fully embrace, you know, commercial pathfinding on the ISS and commercial profit making on there, because the ultimate goal is for companies like us to transition to commercial platforms like Mr. Bigelow's facilities. But we, you know, we can't jump from, you know, making a little bit of money or no money to paying for, you know, for a significant portion of his module or anybody's facility, because the math just doesn't quite, you know, solve. So we need a stepwise transition to allow us to expand operations, you know, first on ISS, and then perhaps next on a commercial module attached to ISS, and then ultimately to a free flyer. We would strongly recommend that a transition plan be created that's committed to a continuous presence in low Earth orbit for persistent microgravity platforms, which likely looks like supporting, you know, a commercial space station being created and put up in space while the ISS is still there. Whether that's by 2024 or beyond, we'll see.
So that fits very nicely with what Mr. Bigelow testified about. Now, you are a small group of folks that started this startup. You got a NASA space grant. So you want to tell us in 45 seconds, no more, how important it is to invest in NASA to invest in young scientists and engineers in your example?
Absolutely. Yeah, I got my very first job in the industry via a NASA space grant. A couple of the co-founders of our company have similar experiences, as well as a lot of guys that we employ, and you know, including new interns that are working for us. You know, that's just as NASA invests in technology from a low technology readiness level and eventually brings it into operational operational capabilities. We need to do that with people as well, and I'm proud to be one of those people and to employ people like that.
I want Mr. Whitesides and Mr. Meyerson to be contemplating the need to streamline the regulatory process for the growing commercial launch industry. Already we had a major step forward that a lot of people don't realize, but the destruct system that in the previous always was done by the Air Force with an Air Force lieutenant sitting there with his finger on the destruct button in case it started going off course and headed to a populated place. That on some of the commercial activities, launches, has been replaced with an autonomous flight safety system which allows the turnaround for rocket launches to be much greater. SpaceX, for example, told me in a few years they expect to be just SpaceX launching 40 launches a year just from the Cape, additional ones from Brownsville, and additional ones from Vandenberg that need to go into polar orbit. But the biggest bulk of them, 40. That's quite an activity when you add all the others in. So I want you all to be thinking and give to us how that regulatory process, particularly with the FAA, can be improved. And I would say in closing, Mr. Chairman, that shortly we expect the Vice President to be announced as the head of a reestablished Space Council in the White House. I think this is a good step, and I think it will allow us as the members of Congress to work much more easily with a group that is dedicated to focus on the space program, and that will, I think, improve the lines of communication considerably. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Udall.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, very much, and thank you to this excellent panel for your insightful testimony here today, and Chairman Cruz for focusing in on this subject. Last Saturday was Earth Day, and the first March for Science took place across the country. I was in Santa Fe at one of the 600 marches across the globe to highlight the importance of scientific research at a time when many scientists, and especially climate scientists, believe they are under attack from the Trump administration. American leadership in science put a man on the moon. This committee has a responsibility to stand up for science, to stand with researchers and innovators who keep America at the cutting edge of science and technology. The commercial space industry, I think, is a great example here. Suborbital space flight from Spaceport America in my home state of New Mexico will soon be a reality. George, you mentioned that in your opening statement. Commercial space companies are aiming for the stars, and this committee has an important role to help them reach this new frontier, as emphasized by the questions before me. Mr. Whitesides, Spaceport America and many New Mexicans hope to see full commercial spaceflight operations begin as soon as possible. Sir Richard Branson said that he would be very disappointed if Virgin Galactic's commercial service is not well underway by the end of next year. Is that a realistic timeline?
It is, Senator. Yeah, we're well into test flight now, and we're looking forward to moving, a fairly big transition of our staff to your state of New Mexico.
That's great. And as you know, New Mexico's invested, I think, $200 million in that spaceport. So we want to see you be a success there. Mr. Rush, I was pleased to read in your statement about how Made in Space took advantage of NASA's Flight Opportunities Program to test a 3D printer on a low-cost suborbital flight, and I think Senator Nelson talked about that. This is exactly the kind of low-cost, high-impact success story I envisioned when fighting to authorize the Flight Opportunities Program in the 2009 NASA bill. Flight Opportunities costs less than 1/1000th of the NASA budget, and I believe it delivers a big bang for the buck. Mr. Rush and Mr. Whitesides, do you support funding for the NASA Flight Opportunities Program?
Yeah, absolutely. The Flight Opportunities Program is an integral portion of our technology development process, that we're able to take low-cost prototypes and expose them to microgravity and see if they work before we make more investments in that to put them into orbit.
Senator, I think it fits well with the ecosystem. Testing out space technologies in suborbital or other platforms, and then moving those to the International Space Station and beyond is a terrific investment and allows great companies like Maiden Space and others to just prosper and grow. So we think it's a really exciting area for our American researchers.
Good, thank you.
If I may add, Senator.
Yeah, please,
Yes,
please, Mr. Meyerson.
So New Shepard, our New Shepard system, which has been flying, we've already flown payloads at our own expense on the New Shepard rocket over the last year. And are part of the Flight Opportunities Program. We support it. We think it's a great opportunity to provide an opportunity to, or great opportunity to get our students from K-12 all the way up to our scientists in national labs using space weightlessness as a science platform and demonstrating new things. So very excited about it.
Great, thank you. Mr. Bigelow, you have a comment on that?
Well, all of these activities are building blocks. They're all part of the entire mosaic that we're all trying to achieve. So I approve and applaud all these kinds of efforts.
Great. Mr. Whitesides, your written testimony notes that Virgin Galactic worked extensively with the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation when getting an operator's license for Spaceship Two. Given the growth in the commercial spaceflight industry, do you expect the resource needs for the FAA AST office to grow as more and more commercial companies develop and launch space vehicles?
I do, Senator. The reality is that the AST is a very small fraction right now of the FAA's budget, and if you look to the horizon, all these exciting increase in volume is going to drive significant resource demands inside AST, and I think relatively small increases from the perspective of the federal budget would drive huge results in terms of enabling companies like ours, like Rob's and others, to quickly get to the operating line and moving out. So we really think, you know, it's maybe rare for companies to be pushing more funding for their regulators, but we really think that this is a case where it could be a good investment for the country.
Great. Thank you so much. We look forward to working with you. Thank you, Chairman Cruz.
Thank you, Senator Udall. All right, let's shift to a different aspect of focus, which is, as we discussed earlier in the hearing, the United Nations Outer Space Treaty was enacted 50 years ago in 1967. How relevant is that treaty today, and how do you see it impacting commercial operations for your company and others in space?
I think the treaty needs to be updated. I think there are aspects of that treaty that should always be maintained, such as the prevention of nuclear weaponry in low Earth orbit or other remote places on foreign bodies or in deep space, whatever. But I think that treaty was cast in a time frame where the United States and Russia didn't know who was going to be reaching the moon first. There were concerns about proprietary possession, ownership of different, perhaps of that asset of the moon. And so the philosophy was different than today. It was unthought of at that time, I'm assuming, that commercial folks would have the wherewithal or the audacity to be thinking about traveling to the moon and conducting business there. So I think it needs to be updated. I don't think that the updates are inconsistent with most of the language provided in the treaty today. The treaty definitely provides for bases to be positioned by sovereign entities, to allow those sovereign entities to populate those bases with military personnel. The treaty is mute on any reference to the size of those bases territorially. There's no geographic constrictions. There is no mention of the number of bases that you may have. So it's wide open, and as we know, not to pick on China, but the fact is that the Chinese Red Army controls their space program. Now, I think that through the FAST efforts on sanctioning or being aware not to sanction launches that could interfere with payloads that could interfere if they were misdirected into somebody's activity on the surface as a start. I think there needs to be a geographic expansion of or definition of what is that isolation standoff distance. What should that be? It's possible that you could extend that to a patented mining opportunity to define the area in which cadastrals and monuments could be established, as they have been for many long time, for a great length of time here in this country and around the world. So, and it's very difficult to not want that. If you're a company that is promoting mining, you're going to spend large amounts of money, risk people's lives, and you don't have some security of a geographical definition, and you're not asking for ownership of the regolith, of the property, but ownership of what you extract in situ from that area. So I think this is not inconsistent. The 67 treaty provides for that each signatory to that treaty needs to prepare methods of their own within each country of how they are going to behave to carry out the spirit of that treaty, which is that all foreign bodies should be used in the interest of the common welfare of mankind. That doesn't exclude free enterprise by any means. Free enterprise hallmark is free enterprise succeeds the best when it serves the public in the greatest way possible. So free enterprise is definitely consistent with serving mankind. And so I don't see any kind of discontinuity. The treaty provides for these kinds of things because it leaves it up to sovereign countries to make these decisions, but it also could be updated. The risk of that is trying to get a consensus where you would actually be able to get a large population of countries to agree, I think.
Are there any specific updates to the treaty that you think are necessary?
I think that I think good fences make good neighbors. I think that there needs to be some language that for the common good of mankind, that activities are going to be exercised on the moon, that there needs to be some specificity to conducting an operation under some geographic definition. And again, as I said, the location of bases is permitted. There is no language as to how many or the size of those bases. They could be, one base could be the size of Texas, because there is nothing in that treaty that says it couldn't be.
Now, you mentioned China in your testimony, and earlier this morning, you and I were visiting about a number of issues, including China. Could you share with this committee your concerns about China's lunar ambitions?
I have a great respect for any company, any country, any people that achieve great things. And China falls into that category very much. So I respect China a great deal. I also I believe I have an understanding that's correct that China is very predisposed to ownership. Whether it's creating the islands in the South China Sea, it's properties in massive quantities that they've purchased in South America or Africa, other places. Whether you open a company and can only own 49% of it, they are very ownership-minded. And I think that logically is possible to be extended in that philosophy to the moon. So I can see a scenario that's not unrealistic to me, that China could exercise an effort to start to lay claim to certain lunar territories. They could do it the old-fashioned way by using lasers to mark the points, put down cadastrals and monuments, and over time acquire a very large amount of territory that might be in the select areas where there's constant sunlight and those kinds of things, you know, in terms of location on the moon. And so I don't think it's a joke. I don't think it's something to be cavalier about. I think such an ownership consequence would have an amazing impact on the image of China vis-a-vis the United States and the rest of the world if they should own large amounts of territory on that body, and we stood back and we weren't prepared. So, I mean, it's a concept that I think deserves thinking about.
Do others on the panel share the concerns about China's ambitions? And I want to expand the question also to include the potential military threat of China in space, taking out space assets potentially.
I would say with respect to Chinese ambitions, more folks launching to space and conducting space activities is generally a good thing. But there are certainly technologies that they have stated, including our own technologies, of the ability to manufacture in space, manufacture large assets and assemble them in space, which we believe have provide an asymmetric advantage to the U.S. military that we should be cognizant of other countries attempting to develop as we move forward.
Last year, Russia signaled that it might separate the Russian segment of the ISS from the American segment sometime between 2023 and 2024. What would it mean to the United States and to our space program if Russia were to separate from the ISS? And could you foresee Russia operating its own station or partnering with China in doing so?
We've had some business relationships with the Russians, and we were treated very well. And so what we learned is that they are very accomplished, and they tend to build things that are bulletproof, as alternative to other approaches in terms of way that you have a philosophy in creating space hardware. I think it would be devastating to the station. In my understanding, was that it was initially created as a mechanism to do 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of things, and one of those was to gather together a number of countries in a communal relationship that was unique. I think that the history of the station ought to be that when it's written, the cessation of the station ought to be in some kind of a context that emerges into something else that, if not profound, at least was amenable to everybody, and it wasn't going a step going backwards. I would see a dislocation of those modules by the Russians as a step backwards, unless there was some kind of alternative agreement that said, well, they may do that, but oh, by the way, we are doing other things here, and to continue the relationship between the two countries. And I don't see that necessarily also is not applicable to China in some way. I wouldn't say that, again, it's not a zero-sum game. I don't see these as being mutually exclusive.
Thank you. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This first question, I think, is to Mr. Whitesides, but certainly I'd love to have a response from all the panelists. As we all know, certain countries have been and continue to be unfairly subsidize their commercial activity, and this undermines competitiveness of many U.S. companies in many different industries. But in many sectors, a clear line can be drawn between appropriate government support of industry and anti-competitive business practices. For example, there's a difference between providing infrastructure and then awarding contracts with that underlying infrastructure versus state-owned enterprises that really undercut free market enterprise. So my question is, as the commercial space industry continues to mature, are you concerned that certain governments are going to undermine companies like yours?
We are, Senator, and I think it's something that Congress should maintain an awareness of and potentially to consider as it thinks about future actions. I think the principles that we would think about are reciprocity. Are American companies able to sell into that market? That's an important question. Often that is not the case. And the creation of corporate entities whose sole purpose is to sell into the commercial marketplace, which often does not allow fair commercial competition. So, what we've done is invested hundreds of millions of dollars to create new commercial space platforms that we hope to compete successfully. We're asking for a fair shot, both in the U.S. markets and abroad. And because these markets are intrinsically global, if certain players are competing in different terms, then that's something that I think Congress should be aware of.
It's global, but there's also a small number of players, which seems like because there's a smaller number of players, you're also more susceptible to potential anti-competitive behavior by other countries in their programs. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there are certainly a limited number of operators around the world, and it's a very price-sensitive market, and so these are important issues, I think, for Congress to be thinking about.
Do others have concerns?
I'd like to add, I mean, the space programs are a matter of national pride. They're national programs, so it is a having a space program is something that any large government takes great pride in. I think we can take great pride in the innovation that's coming out of the United States, aerospace industry, with companies that are on this panel and others. Certainly, from my standpoint, demonstrating reusability, which has the greatest potential for lowering cost of access to space and increasing space access for all, not just Americans, but people and payloads throughout the world. So yes, I agree with Mr. Whitesides that we want to make sure that we have a fair shot at access to these foreign markets, but we should take a lot of pride that innovation is continuing in the United States, and if we can combine that with some of the regulatory streamlining I talked about earlier, I think it can help the U.S. broaden markets.
Is there a line that we draw, thinking of the commercial space industry, is there a line we draw between appropriate government support and anti-competitive behavior that we may see from other countries?
It's tough to compete against operations that are government supported financially, which is not uncommon.
Right.
And so that's a significant challenge, because now you're competing against something with a very powerful money printing partner capability. And so that's certainly a significant challenge. How you regulate that or prohibit that, I don't know.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. I want to thank each of the witnesses for coming this morning. I think this has been a productive and informative hearing, and thank you for the time and energy you have invested in being here and for the leadership you provide in commercial space. It is important not just to your companies, but to the United States as a whole, to the national interest, and to the future. The hearing record for this hearing will remain open for 2 weeks. During this time, senators are asked to submit any questions for the record, and upon receipt, the witnesses are requested to submit their written answers to the committee as soon as possible. And with that, this hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.